I'm so glad that you decided to join us in this conversation. Let me just introduce myself and my colleague and do a little housekeeping. So I am Sandra Della. I'm a 30-year survivor of nonprofits. I made my way through. I ended my corporate career in nonprofits as a vice president of a multi-hospital system. I managed their $20 million foundation and opened Harvest about 11 years ago. And I'm joined today by Scott Selly. Scott and I actually have known each other for about 21 years. And I have great respect for him. We work together at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and Scott is our vice president for business development. He is also the father of 4 daughters. Certainly has some insight into women superpowers, women leadership, and our impact. And I want to thank you to MNN too for hosting this conference, for doing such a great job of hosting this conference, but also for the opportunity to be able to be here and talk on this subject. I do have materials that I can share later, such as links to the studies that we're going to cite here, and a follow-up document with notes from the discussion from the breakout groups, as well as our big group discussion. So if you'd like them after today's session, I can email them to you. I think I can drop them into the Whova app, as long as I get the women are here to help me get back into my profile. I have 2 profiles. I'm split personality, I guess. But I could do that. But if you want to just drop your email maybe in the chat, that's probably the easiest way, or connect with me directly on the app and I could send you the materials after that. Okay. So let me just start by saying I am not an academic on this issue. I'm not an academic expert on this issue, but I am somewhat of an expert by virtue of the fact that I'm a woman. And I've spent 30 years leading nonprofits. So I would say I'm an experiential expert on this issue. The issue concerns me, not in an anarchistic way. I'm not wielding a banner here, but in an impact way. How is this issue impacting our success as an industry, or as an organization, or me and you as a person? So that's why I've been peeling off pieces of the women in nonprofit topic and exploring them with groups like yourself. So today, what we hope to accomplish in the following discussion is to explore the current state of the professional woman in nonprofits. And we'll break off into rooms a couple of times to talk about future implications of the nonprofit sector if the current status doesn't change. We'll explore ways in which women in nonprofit have been proven to have impact, and then break off to discuss how we as an industry, funders, policymakers, and also individuals can lend to change. We're going to come back together after these breakouts and debrief on them. And then at the end of this session, we're going to talk about some of the barriers that might exist to some of the ideas that we came up with and how we can overcome them. So this is actually a working workshop, ladies and gentlemen. So get ready to share. All right. So what is your superpower as a woman? We all have models of women expressing their superpower in literature, as a culture, in historical figures, certainly, in religion and in mythology, women that point us toward morality, toward character, that reveal power and confidence and competence. You know, my favorite video on TikTok, admit that I look in there, but it's a good tool, actually. We do a whole piece on how to build a virtual community, and I really think there's value in Reels and TikTok. But anyways, my favorite video in TikTok is one with the audio of a woman stating, "Have you made people yet? Oh, let me tell you, I've made people, and I'm their leader." I love that, because the most amazing superpower that nature has provided us as women is we make people, tomorrow's people. We are creating the world. Wow. I mean, Imagine what the world would look like if men made people, right? Not disparaging men, it's just a different power structure. But somehow when you think about that, we just not have leveraged that position, that superpower of making the world in other areas in our lives, such as our professional lives. So my question to you is, what is your superpower? We're going to get to know each other a little bit better so we can have these conversations throughout the next hour and a half comfortably. Each of our individual sense of superpowers will be different as each and every one of us, and that's okay. It's really dangerous when we talk about women in nonprofits to think of women as a monolithic group, as one, because we aren't. We're different. So let me use the magic of Zoom right now, and I'm going to send you all off into little groups to share. And what I want you to talk about, other than introducing yourself to each other, is what is your superpower, or if you're not comfortable with talking about that, or you don't feel that you relate to that, what is a superpower of a woman you admire? And then after the breakout session, we're going to regroup and get into the workshop. I won't be asking this time for everyone to share audibly about what they heard, but what I want to encourage you to do is when we come back is just to start entering into the chat what superpowers you heard. Just share what you heard in your chat, okay?
Hey, Sandra, should people turn on their cameras and their mics for these small groups?
Oh, yes, please. That would be great. It doesn't matter what you look like. It's okay. Turn on your camera, turn on your mic. Those are going to be necessary, especially in the breakout rooms, okay? So let me go to my breakout room here. So we have 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. I'm going to break us out into 5 rooms. I'm going to give you about, that gives us about 4 or 5 people per room. I'm going to give you about 6 minutes in the breakout room to introduce yourself and then just to talk briefly about your superpower or the superpower of a woman that you might admire. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're not going to go through this time because we really have such a short period of time together here. This time we're not going to debrief, but what I want to encourage you to do is in the chat, just in your own words, share what you heard people's superpowers were for themselves as women, or maybe for a woman that they admire. Okay. All right, let's get into our discussion on women leadership in nonprofits, impact and change. I have a clip here that I want to share with you. And it was from the, just to set the tone, it actually is a favorite clip of mine. It's from the Women in Leadership in Nonprofits and Corporate Philanthropy panel discussion that was hosted at a Center for Leadership in Pasadena, California, quite a few years back, but I think it's still relevant. And why I'm sharing this clip, is because it's illustrative that some corporations, which is what we are, we're corporations, we're nonprofit corporations, but we are businesses. Some corporations are actually working to figure this out, guys. They're focusing on the issue at a cellular level of the company and industry. So the woman speaking here is from Google. Now, there's a lot we can say about Google, but what is interesting here is that she's breaking down how Google is working at that root level to talk about the status of women in Google. She talks about why and how women in leadership affect output, affect what you're doing, what the industry or what they can do about it, how we talk about ourselves, what we show young women and women about the work of leading nonprofits. And she talks about what the company can do in exploring and understanding leadership traits that are correlated with success that they focus on, and that include women, and what we as women personally can do about this for ourselves. So she brings a perspective that really resonates with me about that is authentic and that is about authentic and meaningful change. So let me play this clip for you. I've broken it up. It's actually an 1.5-hour video. So I've just taken pieces of it. Ava, there's, oh good, you got her. She wants to come in. Let me play this clip for you. It's a little broken up, but I got the highlights in there. And then we're going to go into some of the data that we can look at about women's status in nonprofit. Okay.
Some positive growth, for example, in fields like biology, we're actually now graduating more female.
Oops. So, note to self, I can't do two things.
Biology majors than male, but in areas like physics, math, and computer science, not only are we lower, but we're dropping. So let me just take computer science as an example. Again, coming from Google, we think computer scientists are pretty important, that programmers are pretty key, but the fact of the matter is where we're heading as a society is software very much is becoming a key to remaking so many of our systems and so many of our underlying processes. And if you don't have women who are actually architects of that design and architects of that change and at the table and shaping it as product managers or as engineers, then we're really left out of the conversation, and the things that we're creating are not reflecting either the needs or the wisdom of women. So the other area I think we really need to take a hard look at is the media. If we don't change the media that our young girls and boys are digesting when they're very, very young, it's going to be that much harder to change mindsets and change frameworks. So how do we think about this at Google? Just say a couple quick things about that. So for one thing, I find it really doesn't usually help a conversation when you assume the worst in somebody that's happening. And so what we've found at Google is that we do have an issue with women in leadership there, but our most constructive conversations are when we carry forward the conversation around, the data shows that we have some unconscious preference error in our system. We are selecting for traits that are not correlated with success. We are selecting for traits that are actually not correct variables for the algorithm. That actually helps. So as an example, if you look at people in leadership, they're disproportionately tall. Now, would anyone say that the taller you are, the more naturally gifted you? No. But that comes from an unconscious sort of evolutionary mind, right? Next thing I want to throw out there is a little bit provocative, right? So when I came to Google, Sheryl Sandberg actually hired me. And her premise, if I could just paraphrase it, is that, if you want to get to the C-suite, if you want to be CEO, from the time you're in 5th grade, you need to really lean in. And women, don't pull yourself out of the leadership track before it's time. We need to look really, what is the objective? Because is the objective really to get more women as CEOs, as we today define leaders and CEOs? Or is the goal to define leaders and CEOs in ways that are fully authentic to who we are as humans and where the data correlates with actual success, right? And I think we also need to look at be asking women, what is necessary and what do you need and how can we help you become your best authentic leader? Some positive.
Okay, let's pause for a minute there and feel free to unmute yourself, because what I want to ask the audience, what I want to ask you guys right now is, what were some of the key things you heard in fact, I'm going to just stop sharing for a second, Ava. Let's see how that works so I can see my friends, because I can't see you when I'm screen sharing. So hi, everybody. So what were some of the key things that you heard her say about the issues of addressing, identifying, and working through women leadership in general and at Google? What were some of the things that resonated with you? Feel free to jump in. Or I can call on people.
I think there is something in the chat as well.
Yeah, I saw something from Nina.
I don't see the chat for some reason.
Yeah, no, I was just talking about the point, I don't know if I heard this correctly, having to lean in starting at 5th grade for women. And, obviously that was a very powerful thing, because I wonder if, little boys have to lean in that early as well. And I wonder, I come from kind of a youth development background and also a woman in gender studies background as well. And I thought that, I wonder the implications for women when we have to lean in so early. That was just a thought that I had.
It's an interesting thought, and it's a good thought to unpack a little bit more. In the whole context, and I'll send the link to this video because the whole video is really quite revealing. So I'll share the, Ava, if I forget, just remind me, share the link to video. The social behavior life of a child. And while you were all in breakout rooms, I was really understanding the verbal and nonverbal information that we are embedding in our young women, and not making them, one of the key things that she talks about in this video too is making sure that we're being true to ourselves. Do we want to achieve CEO status just because we want to break that ceiling and be the one to achieve it, or is it meaningful to us? And I think that changes as you age. I'm 59, and while I never was a CEO of a nonprofit, I was a vice president, and now I'm the owner of a business. But I am seeing that my perspective is changing. But when you're young, being able to express yourself and be the person that you want without the implication of whether it's good for you or bad for you for your future self is really important. And I think that's what you're getting at here. Is it fear to do that? I think what we'll see in the rest of the slides is some of the characteristics and traits that women have that bring impact, especially to nonprofit organizations, are inherent to our nature maybe. And so instead of understanding what those traits are, certainly not being tall, but one of the things we'll look at is empathy. So understanding that empathy is part of that and really maybe leaning into that, right? Rather than asking a 5th grader, what is it that you want to be as an adult? What else did we hear? There was, women in discussion. What really struck me was when she said, as her industry that does technology, if women are not in leadership positions to have that discussion, the product is filled with holes, gaps, because it's not meeting the entire needs of a community. And so think about the implications of that from the nonprofit sector. If we don't have, and we're going to see the numbers in a second, but if we don't have representation from leaders on boards and at the executive level, what's happening to the impact or the influence that can be had on the mission? What gaps exist? Okay. All right,
And
let me share
can
yeah, go ahead. Yes, please.
The only other thing that jumped out to me was when she asked the question of, do we really want more women as, in the C-suite, or, and where do we transform leadership to see better success? Because I think that's one thing where, I've read a lot of literature, but thinking about management versus leadership. And obviously you're going to see better results with leadership, but the male traits seem to be the ones where managers are rewarded. So kind of changing the conversation in terms of course, we want to be in the C-suite, but what does that really mean? And how do you transform leadership generally so that there are better outcomes?
That is such a great point. And I love the continuum that it's clear that she's working in this, right? Because the continuum is, first she says data-driven. Let's move aside from anchored bias or assumptions or beliefs, and let's go to the data and see what that's happening, right? And then she moves from data-driven to identifying traits for success, not necessarily traits for promotion. So traits for promotion might be different than traits for success. And then she says, do we really want to just push women into the CEO position? Or do we want to support women? Once we've gotten those two things down, the data and the traits for success, do we want to support women in their journey to strengthen those traits for success so that they now fit what has been adjusted as the model? I thought that was fascinating, right? A lot of good chat in here. Oh, this is going to be such a good session. I wish we had a few more hours. Okay, so let me see where we're at right now. I'm gonna put that down and share my screen again. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the size of the industry that we're talking about. So we know that from our work here, despite movement forward, there still are some gender specific barriers to becoming a leader. And you heard in her clip, she talks about the external barriers, you know, the boys club, the systems of exclusion, rank sexism, harassment, all of that. But there are also some internal barriers, the voices we hear inside our head and the stories we tell ourselves. There are things we can do. And in order to do that, we need to first look at the industry and where we are currently. All right. So we're a pretty big deal. I'm a pretty big deal. I have a library with lots of books, smells like Corinthian leather. I don't know if anybody's a Step Brothers fan, but I love that movie. Probably because I have boys. So we are 5.5% of the gross domestic product. To put that in perspective, defense is 3% of the GDP. So we're pretty big, people. We are a $430 billion industry. And as you can see from this next slide, we employ 12.3 million people. That's 10% of the US workforce. Now, yes, this is all 501s, including the big people, the hospitals and the academic institutions. But those are also part of the challenge of women leadership. So we can't leave them out. Of this workforce, on average, we make up about 75% of the nonprofit workforce. That means about 9.2 million American women work in nonprofit, right? Which makes us actually the third largest workforce in the US. Now, when we talk about superpowers, right, we're there. So one of the questions is, well, is it our size? Are we not represented? Well, as a workforce, we certainly are represented, right? So what are some of the data points that we see that are problematic? Now, let me tell you, there are a lot of moving parts to this issue, more than we can address today. So what I did here is, and I also want to warn you, they're all interconnected. So it's very hard for us to do what we're doing today, pulling out one or two pieces and just examining them and trying to come up with some solutions, because they are, the interrelated nature means they're going to impact other areas. But what I wanted to do today is pull a few out, but we can't feel satisfied at the end saying, oh, this is a great solution, without considering the impact that it would have on the others, because this really is a process. So here are the highlights that I want to review in the next few slides. Where are we on time? Okay. Number one, women are not equally represented within different levels. Okay, so we know that. We know that there's disparity. And proportionally, the positions that women have not really changed in the last 10 years, proportionally speaking. And pay equity has not made significant gains in narrowing that gap. So those are the features of these. And these all are cited. So again, I could send either the study or the organization. Most of them came from Chronicle of Philanthropy, journal articles, articles from university programs like the one at Indiana University. But I wanted to make sure that we had the most recent ones. Some of these are from maybe 2019 because, you know, time and distance makes it hard to stay too relevant. But let's start that here. In small nonprofits, 57% of women are now CEOs. Okay, so then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, yeah, 7 years ago, 53% of women were CEOs. It's not bad. At least it's upward focus, right? But when we look at medium to large organizations, only about 20% of those 9 million women working in the sector lead nonprofits that have budgets over 50 million. So the big show still remains the domain of men. Why is this? It actually gets worse if you are a woman of color. Just 1 in 5 nonprofit chief executives is a person of color. So theoretically, and there's a lot of other numbers that should go into here, but let's just for rule of thumb, look at this and try to get our arms around it. Of the 1.8 million women leading organizations with budgets over 50 million, less than 360,000 of them are women of color, theoretically. It's probably lower than that, okay? Because we have to take the whole shebang of all of the women in there. One of the challenges we have here is we don't have good data, and we need better data. And if we had better data, we could have these types of discussions and plans. I don't know why we don't have good data. We have data, it tracks. Everybody seems to want to track the same data. We need to expand this. We need to have better data. Here's another issue. According to a report from McKinsey & Company, which is actually one of the biggest consulting firms, and Bain spun off from them from the nonprofit sector quite a few, maybe decades ago. In 2019, only 85 women were promoted for every 100 men who climbed up the corporate ladder. Now, why does that matter? Well, it certainly does create less incentive for women to lean in, right? If you see this as a trend and you're up against this, stepping up or even remaining in the nonprofit workplace can be exhausting. It can seem like futility, right? Like that Escher print of the steps where you just keep going around and around and you're not getting anywhere. Personally, I experienced this when I was in the corporate sector within the hospital system. And if you don't have a good support system, if you haven't leaned in, you could step out. And that hurts all of us. And I'm not putting any guilt on anybody. There's no guilt here. It's just the reality. It's the data of what we're looking at. The compensation as well. So what we see here is that CEO women of nonprofits of any size are actually paid about 8% less than average than their male counterparts. Well, what this does, right, it reinforces that unfortunate stereotype that people who work for nonprofits are chronically underpaid, which in some areas they are, right? We're not a monolith. It's not just all across the board. But that's what it reinforces, right? When you see that happening. And since women outnumber men in the nonprofit workforce, who's to say that, the entire charitable nonprofit community's compensation levels aren't undeservedly dragged down because of that? If 75% of the workforce is being underpaid, right? It also when it's magnified over time, this impacts women's lives, this impacts family lives, and this impacts communities. So for instance, over a single woman's work tenure, this underpayment compounds annually. And the pay cap that creates significantly allows for fewer dollars devoted towards retirement savings, or even just discretionary dollars for women to invest in their own life, in their own health, in their own family. And that's compounded, of course, if you're a single household, a single woman household. Women running nonprofits with $2.5 to $5 million budgets are paid a full 23% less than males. So overall, we're underpaid 8%. But when we start to dig a little deeper as organizational leaders, 23% is, that makes me a little angry. I'll be honest. And I try to keep emotion out of this because it's not, yeah, that makes me a little upset. And then if we look at the board member representation, if we go back to what we heard in that video, where if women are not at the table, how are we getting the things right? How are we creating the right answers, the right solutions? Women represent only 48% of board members and 42% of board chairs. And this was from 2017. Now, if someone in this group, again, I'm not an academic expert on this, but I am an experiential expert. If someone in this group today has other numbers, please share them with me because I'm collecting them and I really want this conversation to continue. All right. Okay, time for another breakout room. Are we ready? Ava, is there anything, or Scott, is there anything in the chat that I should address before we go into breakout?
No.
Nope.
Okay, good. So here's what I would like to happen in this small group discussion, and we'll have about another 6-7 minutes because we have more participants now. What future impact do you think the information we just reviewed, what we just learned, what future impact may that have on nonprofits individually, on the industry as a whole, and on our communities? All right, everybody back? I want to keep us moving along because we have an awful lot. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to hear from 2 or 3 people maybe that can debrief on some of the highlights. Let's try to keep it as short as possible because we have a little bit more to go through, another breakout room, and then a group discussion, and we only have about 20 minutes left, 25 minutes left. So let me stop sharing so I could see everybody. Okay, so who would like to share let me just change this. Who would like to share what they heard in their breakout room? Just unmute your mic, be free, talk, let us know. Sometimes we're too polite.
I'll speak up.
Thank you. Good for you.
For one of the keys for me throughout that has been sort of the empathy cue that that women have, and you know, because I was a tiny bit late to the start of the session, you know, I didn't get to talk about what I thought was my superpower in that first session, but I had written down, you know, empathy and reading people, right? And so one of my first thoughts about this information was, is our empathy holding us back with regard to asking for money? Like, I know, and I've worked in both the nonprofit and the private world, and I know that it's always, well, if I get that money, if I ask for that money and they give it to me, then that money's not going to the program. You know, that money, you know, right, right.
Yeah.
And you know, like maybe it's not even a conscious thought.
And much of that is internal. You know, we
Right.
struggle with those internal things of, especially in a nature where, you know, we're nurturing and we give. And how many times did my mother allow us to have the last pork chop off the plate, you know, before she even ate, right? So that's just, it might be in some people, and again, we're not a monolith, so I don't want to say everybody's like this, but I think it is. That was great. Someone else, share what you heard in your group about the future impact that this might have.
I'll go. We talked a little bit about how the data that we heard about in the video you shared, it brings out such a larger conversation about how did we get here, right? What are the reasons that women are underpaid? And is it because we're underpaid, or are men overpaid? Or it was just a much larger conversation than these few data points, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is all interrelated. And, you know, both you and Lisa say the same thing. You know, if we're getting the money, why aren't we getting the money? Why is somebody else getting the money? But really under it both is, well, what else can that money do? And, you know, that is a worldview that I think in the corporate sector is much easier to adjust to, because the reality is, if you're in an analogy, but you know, if you're in a plane that's going down, you certainly have to put your oxygen mask on first before helping other people. So if you're not whole, how many times does someone say to me, Mama, you have to fill up your warehouse if you're going to help those kids? And it's true. So if you're not whole by having an income that is above the Mendoza line and that you can feel confident and comfortable, and that's up to you. There is no one else can tell you what that is. It's up to you. If you aren't there, how can you give your best to the organization? And so that certainly creates some obstacles to being a leader or to reaching leadership there. That's great. Okay, let me try to share my screen again because we have some more stuff to look at. And I apologize for any delays here. I said to the ladies this morning, am I the drama? I think I'm the drama here, but okay. All right, so let's now look at what strengths do women bring to nonprofits. Now there is some data on this, and there's universal data on what strengths women bring to leadership positions, and certainly that can be extrapolated to be a nonprofit because we are corporations. And as was said just recently, empathy is a huge one. It is so powerful. It has such a powerful effect on organizations. Empathy has been shown to increase innovation. When people report that their leaders that they work with are empathetic, they're more likely to report that they're able to also be innovative. There's a corollary there. In fact, 61% of employees compared to 13% of employees said that, empathy in their leader allows more innovation. Engagement. 76% of people who experience empathy in the workforce with their leadership reported that they're engaged. They're really engaged compared to 32%. Retention. 57% of women and 57, oh, this is an interesting one. 57% of white women and 62% of women of color said they were unlikely to think about leaving a company when they felt that their life circumstances were respected and valued by their company. And that comes from empathy, right? Inclusivity, 50% of people with empathetic leaders reported that their workplace was inclusive compared with only 17% who said they didn't have empathetic. And then obviously what we worry about as women is work life. And that doesn't matter whether you have children or not, because we're all part of an ecosystem in a family. So work life could be juggling your personal, your children, your parents, your grandparents, your cousin, whoever is in your life, your partner. 86% of women reported that they were able to navigate those demands more satisfyingly. Maybe not successfully, but they didn't have the stress in there as much as 60% who said they didn't have an empathetic leader. So empathy is huge. In fact, high emotional quotient. I don't know if you've heard of that, but emotional quotient is different from your IQ. Leaders who have high IQ are known to build better working relationships, and traits of empathy and EQ are more frequently displayed by female leaders. So if we just had a hard stop there, right, with all of those outputs, we could have an entire discussion on that and how we want to integrate that concept into the industry, into our own organizations, and even into our own personal and professional lives. Again, they've been found to be more creative and have a higher sense of employee satisfaction and overall performance. Well, who wouldn't want this from their organization? They had a stronger sense of growth and recognition. Turnover is huge right now. We at Harvest are in a recruitment bubble. And I get it. A lot of people went through the shutdown. A lot of people navigated the gauntlet and went through some really difficult things that they didn't think they'd ever have to go through or ever could go through. And we're super proud we did, and we're exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted. And so turnover is high. We're doing a lot of executive recruitment right now. But what I don't believe it has to do with is the lack of leadership, EQ, and empathy in the industry and the organization. But retention does save the organization money. It's just as with your donor base. To earn a donor costs you more, and to keep them costs you less. So you want to keep these people on. Self-regulation. Let's talk about that. What this means is when we are feeling stressed at work, when we are about to lose it, when we feel like we can't take one more step, female leaders encourage you to self-regulate more than male leaders do. Data. It's not a judgment call. It's not a stereotype. This is what data is showing us. And that could be why fewer women burn out than men. You know, we have this support system when we have women leadership there. And then this as a bottom line, and I'm a bottom line kind of person with your organizations because you are a company and you need to make money, darn it. Research on gender inclusiveness shows that organizations with females that are in higher positions thrive and they enjoy a much bigger economic growth, more solid, more consistent economic growth. That's huge. So Bain and Company, I told you they're a spinoff from McKinsey and Company, and Bain looks just at nonprofits. Women's aspiration, that leaning in, that desire to grow, drops more than 60% over the course of their career, while men's stay the same. Part of the theory here is that we just aren't showcasing women at the top and communicating the benefits, right? To not only achieving gender parity, but to leaning in and getting there, if that's what we want as a woman, right? Again, individuals. This is huge. And this goes back to Nina's question of 5th grade, right? So if you're aspiring to lead people, if you have that gift and talent of leadership and you're a visionary and you, like me, get off on accomplishment and production and success, you're going to want to follow that path. But if what you see over time, and if this statistic is true, you start to get discouraged and you start to think, I'm just going to bow out and find my satisfaction elsewhere. And that could hurt us as an industry. Women in leadership found that this study by KPMG found that 86% of women reported becoming encouraged to achieve more professionalism, more professionally when they saw other women in leadership position. So let's stop for a minute and think about our industry. We certainly do have women in leadership position. We know that. We know that there's a 0.5% overall and 50% overall or a little bit more, and maybe 20 to 30 in the very large organizations. But how can this be leveraged for that growth model, that 5th grader, right? That young woman? And what messages are we sending about nonprofit that might discourage or uninspire someone to want to move toward that? And then finally, in a University of Berkeley study, 63% of women reported never having a formal mentor in the workplace. Now, there's a lot I can say about this and a lot Scott can say about this, because he and another one of our colleagues, Melanie Ciccarelli, have been elected to a local AFP board, and they are setting out to establish a mentor program. And man, is this hard. And I think one of the things as an industry we need to do is first define what we mean by mentorship. But the fact that 63% of women who could be inspired and could aspire to higher roles find that they've never had a formal mentor, I mean, that's glaring, right? That's something we should think about. All right, we are time check. We have 15 minutes left. So I am going to send you back out into small groups. You don't have to answer all of these questions, but what I would like your conversation to focus on is, what are some things that either the sector can do, funders or policymakers, or you, to be part of a solution? What are some of those things? When we come back, we're going to talk about that. I really would love to get to the discussion on barriers, but I might hold off on that, and then we can just continue to talk in generalities about this, because I think there's some really good insight that's being created here that I want to be able to capture. Okay, so let me send you all off into breakout rooms again. And what you're talking about is, what might the sector, funders, policymakers, or even yourself do to improve upon this issue? about the improvement of the status of women in leadership positions. What could you do to be part of the solution? And off you go. Let's hear from some groups, maybe from people we haven't heard from yet, as to what are some of the things that you think either the sector, funders, policymakers, or even ourselves can do to help this conversation along, to drive new dialogue, or to create solutions. And again, feel free to unmute and just talk away.
I'll jump in. I think that one of the things we talked a lot about was this idea of mentoring, and I having been somebody who has mentored some younger women coming into the nonprofit world, I've seen the value of it. It was something that I didn't have as I entered into nonprofit over 20 years ago. So I think the work that is going to be done in that area is really critical to helping both attract women into the industry, as well as help reset the stage for them, so that we don't just sit back and kind of let them just go along that path that it's always been. So I think helping to tell them that it's okay to have these conversations like we're having right now, and expect more. That I think is a big piece of it, is expect more as they're coming into the industry. The other thing that I had talked about was this idea that as we as women, when we get into leadership roles within nonprofit in particular, is that we advocate. We know what we're making and we know what we're paying. And we should be advocating to make sure that there is more equity across the boards in that particular area.
That's a really important point. And one of the things that we talk about with community foundations quite often, because when we do recruitment, we work with foundations quite often who are funding the recruitment process. And, we have an opportunity to have their ear to say, look, you're paying X amount. And that's what the market is showing, but the market's showing that because you're paying it, right? So let's do some point to point against other similar type roles with the same level of responsibility, the same financial burdens, that sort of thing, and see if we're really being accurate. So that's a great point, Paula. Who else wants to share?
I will. I'm just getting a Lego for my 2-year-old, so it's timely. One of the things I mentioned and talked about was that as an industry and as a sector, like the nonprofits can offer flexibility to parents, to people, to everyone, will help women, and I just think across the board equity to people that just can do the work, want to do the work, and just need that ability to be flexible in leadership positions, not having to be in a 9-to-5 environment, and being honest and upfront about that, and being okay with it, honestly and upfront, can be really life-changing for the employees and productivity too. So as my 2-year-old runs away.
Great, and that's true. We experience it. So let's see how we can develop that into a policy where everyone wins in this, that something doesn't suffer because of it, the woman leader or the organization. Michelle, go ahead. I see your hand.
Oh, I was just applauding that thought as someone who's very
okay.
much experiencing that herself. I just wanted to, yes, kudos that thought.
So one of the things we know about nonprofit, or I know after 30 years, is we are late adopters of everything. We're very rigid, we're not very transparent, and we cling to habit out of fear, out of need, out of direction, whatever. One of the silver linings in this shutdown was that we were forced through a vortex, and we had to change. We had to change the way that we sat. We had to change where we sat. We had to change how we communicated. I think there is always a benefit in every struggle and fire we go through, and that certainly was. And And I encourage the industry to continue to move in that direction and not to immediately run back to old habits. Because I think one of the habits that we learned is we can comfortably do work anywhere, anytime, and make it work. Does it take a little more thought and process? Yes, but that is part of the process of adopting and adjusting to the equity for women leadership. I think we have, we have 1 minute left. So what I want to do is thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this discussion. It is for, an hour and 15 minutes. We haven't even scratched the surface. I want to encourage people to have these dialogues, both in your organization that you feel you have influence in your board, in your committees, in your community. If you're part of an association such as MNN, have conversations there. Community is so important. Find a community that you belong in to have these conversations, a community that you have a shared purpose in, where you can share experiences and resources and consistently and intentionally talk about this. I've not yet been satisfied and found one group that can lead this discussion. If anybody has any ideas on who that group could be, let me know. I'd love to connect with them. But I think individually, if we continue to build this from the ground up, this dialogue, I think we'll continue to see some changes and hopefully some really big leaps forward, some aha moments that we can all be proud of. I really appreciate your time. Wish we had more of it. Thank you so much for joining, and keep this conversation going. I appreciate you.